going to find an interesting dynamic with that. I've just been watching the presentations. Does anybody want to stretch or anything? It's been here for a while. Look around, it's fine by me. There's a dynamic in communicating that you see in situations like this. As I'm speculating on this, but I think it's right, that our first presenter was the youngest presenter. And I believe it was probably the most technically, no all due respect, well presented. Our next presenter was slightly older, also very technically proficient. Mike is probably a little bit older than the previous two presenters. Very good technically, Mike, but still, you know, he kind of brought Legos and stuff. It's a little not quite the same level. And I am obviously the Gen Xer, I guess. My presentation will consist of me talking to you, you talking to me, and I may use that blackboard a little bit, and that's going to be all that's going to happen with me up there, okay? I'm not going to spend too much time on why I'm here, what I'm doing here. Mike did a good job pretty much of explaining that dynamic. I want to address a couple of things just from the earlier speakers. There's one, you know, especially obviously having been an employee at NBC for 9 years, I took obviously some pretty significant issues with Will's presentation about the media oligopoly. I don't know if you know this, Will. Are you paying attention?
Yes, yes, of course I am.
I'll correct you in public. So you put up there that there's this demonic cabal of 5 or 6 media oligopolies that pretty much control the totality of global information flows for the enrichment of themselves and to the destruction of the world as we know it. Is that a fair?
Not the destruction, the pursuit is the key. But we expect them.
Again, I'm paraphrasing. So
yeah, no problem.
Now, in presenting that, you made what I would say, significant and critical error and a disservice to your audience, honestly, in the process. And if you don't mind, I'm going to correct it now.
Sure.
I looked up, so you had Disney and that ESPN and all that stuff. And then I think you had CBS and all that. And then there was a News Corp and Rupert and all that. And then I forget the other one you had, oh yeah, Time Warner with HBO and CNN and all that. And then you had GE and MSNBC. You should know that GE sold NBC to Comcast, bro. Don't let it happen again.
As a veteran, roger that.
No, when I look at, you know, it's obvious that, you know, I have been exposed to a lot of the truth and realities of both the incentives in our financial system, the incentives in our media system. I have been exposed to my own naivete in believing that a direct interaction with the arms of power in our financial and media system may have some value if you use if you manipulate the power that you have, and I had for periods of time significant influence within some of those communities, that if you use that in a certain way, that you can actually have a positive impact. In order to feel that that's an appropriate use of your time and energy, you have to have the belief that there are honest actors involved in the system, or at the very least, there are people who want to be honest actors involved in the system, and that given the opportunity to make better decisions or different decisions, that those decisions would even be considered. I was one of the people that would largely describe my worldview, I would say, up until 2008 or 9, this person. After the financial crisis, and I was so naive during the financial crisis that I actually believed that in the throes of I was on the phone every night with the heads of the exchanges, government officials, all these important people, talking about how we're going to restructure the system, recapitalize the bank, break it all up, with all the things that are going to, I'm like, this is going to be fantastic. We're finally going to re-rack this thing, and we're going to restore order. And they're all telling me how to, and obviously, absolutely none of that happened. And so I quit my job. I couldn't continue to even pretend that there was merit in a public conversation about investment of some kind when, anyway, you get it. So I was like, oh, well, if the financial system is corrupt, this just shows how naive and foolish a man I can be. Obviously, you just need to address the political system. The political system is obviously going to be the way to solve the financial system. Anyway, to fast forward through it, by the time I got done 3 years at MSNBC, it was apparent to me that A, the solutions to pretty much all of our problems already exist. B, that the people who have the power to scale those solutions have no interest or economic incentive or media, and there's no incentive in any kind to do it. And that pretending that we don't know what the solution is the easiest way to perpetuate the system. At the same time, and it was interesting because ultimately my decision to quit and come out here came from a talk not dissimilar to this in San Diego, at which Colin Archiplay, who's the founder of Archie's Acres, was in the audience, and that particular talk I was talking about how they don't exist. I was saying, well, you can't expect them to save you, and you can't expect they're not hurting you, or they're not going to help you because they don't exist. Right? There's only us. Right? And at the end of my talk, Colin got up and said, I believe they do exist. I believe they're the person that you see in the mirror when you wake up every morning. Now, at the time that he said that, I was in the process of studying a couple of things. One, I was studying, and I say that this, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I was reading the consumer and some of the technical writing on string theory. And string theory, in layman's terms, as I describe it, and I'm not a professor thereof, so bear with me, is effectively based on the premise that the rate of vibration, that the harmonics, if you will, or the energetic vibration, at any given moment in time, are determinative as to what manifests. So that what forms, it's effectively, if you think about Will's talk, where Will is talking about how what is projected upon us affects what cellularly manifests, right? So that projection is a certain vibration that is experienced on a cellular level and then affects the cellular structure. And I'm sort of playing with that idea. And having come to the end of the rainbow in terms of my previous efforts, and realizing that there were not genuine actors involved, and realizing that power for change is ultimately derived from the rate of vibration, and that the harmonics of how you vibrate. Are you vibrating in fear? Are you vibrating in anxiety? Are you vibrating in negative energy fields, whatever that may be at the time? Or are you vibrating in positive energy fields? And that historically has been viewed as a fairly either abstract or sort of far out concept. But the nice thing about quantum mechanics and string theory is that it's proven out in a very scientific way that the rate of vibration dictates what manifests. So I was playing with the idea that it's not so much that we're a function of the outside world and what it's putting into us, but that the outside world around us is a function of our collective vibration internally. That it's our internal rate of vibration that dictates the external reflection, not the external reflection that dictates the internal. For me, that was a revolutionary thought, because that took me from a position of feeling relatively A, powerless, and B, overwhelmed, to feeling remarkably empowered, because how I vibrate is a decision that I get to make all day, every day. I don't get to decide what's on cable news. I don't get to decide how they build the cities. I don't get to decide really much of anything. But I do get to decide how I spend my time, who I spend my time with, the thoughts that I choose to think, and the words that I choose to use. That to me, which was a much smaller thought, if you will, relative to the sort of large thoughts that I was used to indulging my ego in as to how the financial legislation, the banking system has to be organized like this, not like that. The energy management system has to be like this, not like that. The healthcare management system has to be like this, not like that. And basically I had a lot of list of things as to what all of you, and quite honestly, the other 7 billion people need to be doing. And if they just do it, we won't really have a problem. That's what the problem is, right? But I wasn't spending a lot of time thinking about what am I thinking from 1 minute to the next? How am I vibrating from 1 minute to the next? What words am I using from 1 minute to the next? And it was in switching to that meditation, which was brought home to me when Colin Archiplay informed me that they do exist. I was living in a fantasy world where they didn't exist. Then you can't blame them, you can't expect them to save you. And Colin Archiplay gave me the rude awakening that they did exist, and that I was them. Which was a nightmare, because I hate them. I love me, but I don't like them. And if I'm them, it was at that point, going to the Colin experience, after that talk, I asked Colin what he did. And Colin explained to me that he was in his early 30s and that he had served 3 tours in Iraq and that he had no experience with agriculture, hydroponics, or anything that he was currently doing, other than the fact that his wife was really into the idea of living on a farm, because when she was a little girl, she had this fantasy that she was going to live in Italy, and it just so happens that North San Diego County looks a bit like Italy, and so Colin found himself living on this place where his wife got him set up, and it was fantastic, and it was an avocado farm. That's great, other than the fact that avocados require a ton of water. And he got their first water bill from the first month, and the water bill was $900, and he's like, is that our water bill for the year? And she was like, no, that's our water bill for March. And so Colin had to figure out how he was going to not use so much water, not because he has anything against water, but because he didn't have the kind of dough to be blowing $1,000 a month watering avocado trees and selling. If anybody buys avocados around here, they're relatively cheap, and so it's not going to pay the water bill. Anyway, so I listened to him, and I won't go too much further into that story. I'll invite you to talk to Rob or Mike or Kyle or look on the internet or anything like to learn more about that. So I'm listening to Colin, who has no reasonable business being an executive who is technically proficient, operationally proficient, and agriculturally proficient in growing produce that's sold at Whole Foods throughout San Diego County. But he is, and he does because he had to. And a couple of the things that I used to really harp on when I was at MSNBC was one of my biggies was unemployment. Another one of my biggies was what I view as an extremely abusive relationship between the policymakers in this country and those who serve in our armed forces. I come from a family where I have one uncle who served in the Iraq War both times, the first and the second time around. I have another uncle who was drafted into the Vietnam War, who I have a very vivid memories of his return from that war, and a number of his other siblings who served in various arms of the military. I only bring that up because I believe that there in this country, that particularly with the volunteer army of the modern era, that there has become a very distinct separation between the average American and the average American soldier. In some ways, we almost have a professionalized Roman army that is paid and separate, and they're just sort of, they work for us, and we just tell them to do things, and they beat up bad guys for us, and we're tough, and we just talk about how tough we are, but we don't have to do anything. And Mike will do it, and it'll be great. Thanks, Mike. And then when we deal with the veterans as a group, first of all, we deal with them as a group, which is as stupid as dealing with any group of people as a group. But when we deal with the veterans, we tend to either deal with them through what, and this is my opinion, the internalized guilt and shame of civil society's abuse of the military, which manifests itself either through the excessive victimization of our veterans. Oh, you poor things, we feel so bad, what can we do for you? Or the hero worship of our veterans. You guys, thank you so much, my God, you guys are gods. The problem with being placed in either the victimized posture or the aggrandized posture is that it fails to acknowledge the fact that they are us. Remember, there's no them. One, although there is them, but we went over that. But beyond that, this particular group tends to be young men between, let's say, 25 and 35, who have the vast majority of their lives in front of them, who have self-identified already as being willing to volunteer to engage in combat that has the distinct possibility of resulting in their own death. A war that 99% of the American population refused to volunteer to participate in, which means, using the scientific method, Michael, that we have pre-identified the 1% of our population that has a predisposition to do things that are way more fucked up than most people are willing to do. That's a good thing to know about a group of people. Because that means that that group of people may be willing to do a lot of things in our own domestic society, like decide to build a bunch of hydroponic organic greenhouses in every city in America, or decide to convert every city in America to a sustainable energy matrix, or decide to convert a health systems. I can you look over there. That they may actually have self-identified as the 1% that can lead in that. These are all the thoughts going through my head in my apartment in New York, and then I'm like, how do I put this on a TV show? This is genius, you know. I put this on the show. And so I'm like, we'll call Colin Archipel, we'll put him on the show, we'll make him a guest on the show. We'll have just put him on the show. See, he's just a guy, and he's just doing a thing. It's great. And I'm sort of doing these things, right? So I'm in this place where I'm like, it's not my opinion as to the financial system or the health system or the energy system. It's my thoughts, my actions, my harmonics, how am I, so I'm in that one place. I'm there in the mirror. I've got this veteran thing going on. And it becomes apparent, and it is now, the presidential election is coming up. My contract is expiring at MSNBC. It's June of 2012. It's Obama, Romney. Who are you in for? And I'm like, Obama, Romney, you know. And Obama, anyway, let's not even get into it. At the same time, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to be dead. We're all going to be dead. This is a blink. And I'm like, how much more of my time do I want to spend having a conversation about something stupid? Like Obama Romney, when I could be learning more, meeting more, and doing more with this group of 1% of people that have already self-identified to do some really fucked up shit. And they might be willing to do a bunch more. And it may not have to involve armed conflict. It may have to involve building buildings that have never been built before. And so I quit my job, sold my stuff and moved out here. And I'm like, well, what resources beyond my thoughts and my words and my sort of, do I actually have? Like, how do I actually, I could help? Am I going to just go start building greenhouses? I can do that, I'll help. I'm not bad with it. I can move your hammer. But after 20 years in New York, my two biggest resources were the ability to accumulate attention, like putting that piece that you guys saw on ABC, and there'll be a lot more of that to come, and accumulate money. And my decision is to work with Mike and Kyle and Rob and as many others as possible to accumulate the necessary communication and financial resources so that we can actually do it as opposed to talk about it. Now, let me be very clear. I have no delusions that myself and a merry band of veterans going around building greenhouses is going to do that much to dent the fact that there's a multi-billion-dollar, multi-billion person complex that's hell-bent on destroying the world, or trying to destroy the world. So, because the realization is, and I think this is important, is that linear solutions are immensely ineffective in a world like the one that we live in. So where does the solution actually live? And it doesn't, where I work is effectively irrelevant. What we do in this room is effectively irrelevant. Well, if you look at the sort of the self-organizing principles of humanity, humanity tends to self-organize around what I define as the mythology of power. Meaning, little boys and little girls look into the myths of society, whether it was its ancient mythology or the modern mythology now, which I would argue is in the production of film, it's in the production of television, it's in the production of what you see, that the production of mythology of power, and that younger people set their internal harmonic calibration, their thoughts, their aspirations, based on what they perceive at the apex of the mythology of power. I want to be like that particular myth. What myth do I aspire to? And everybody internally has some myth, whether it's very explicit, whether you want to be like your mom or your dad, or you've got some external thing, or it's just an archetype that attracts you. You want to be a cowboy, you want to be a soldier, you want to be whatever it is, a banker, a lawyer, a hippie, I don't care. But there's archetypes for these types of aspirations. And I do believe that the answer to how, going back to the fundamental question, which is, how do we fill the gap? Here, I'm going to use a chalkboard. I swore I was threatened to do this. I'm going to do it. Forgive me. You're never supposed to turn your back on an audience, by the way, so I'm sorry that you're looking at my back. It would blow your mind. Reality. Right now, the vast majority of our resources are obviously carbon-based. Our healthcare system is grossly inefficient. It's not really a healthcare system, it's a disease treatment system, incentivized to have as much disease as humanly possible, because the more disease there is, the more money we can all make. We can go down the list of all these things, it's fabulous. Right now, there's a massive gap, an expanding gap between what's possible and what's reality. Should I move this out more? Can you guys see this? Sorry. There we go. Now we're going to have some fun. There's a unique characteristic to this moment in time. Normally, the rate of change of what's possible in the history of the world is very slow. And reality is determined on a generation by generation basis. So typically for reality to change, a given generation of power has to die, the next generation comes in, and it takes, and so the rate of change for reality is actually getting slower because people are living longer, while the rate of change of what's getting is going faster because of technology. So we're going to have a way to cross this gap, right? And what this gap right now is fear. right? This is where fear is bred and lives, individually and collectively, right? And so, and this is why we come at this, the Zeitgeist movement. Guy makes a movie called Zeitgeist, says we need to start a movement. All of a sudden, there's all these chapters all over the world. Why is that? Well, because the rate of change of what's possible is faster than it's ever been. The rate of change in reality is slower than it's ever been. The gap is bigger than it's ever been, and the fear level is really high. So there's an incredibly large population of people that are desperately searching for something to do with their use of their time that can be beneficial to solving this problem. Some of us have a lot of influence to do that. Some of us have a little bit of influence to do that. But when you come to the realization that a linear solution, even the most profound group of most powerful people who are the most highly trained Marines in the world building these cities on a linear solution, they don't stand a chance. So you need an asymmetrical solution, which is ultimately in the myth. Because the myth is the only thing that can change the harmonic or the vibration. So when you look at a billion people, how do you get a billion people to change immediately? Not through a linear, you can't go from one to the next person and be like, listen, look at this fucking greenhouse dude, it's awesome. Totally do the thing, get tomatoes, it's great. You don't need any solar panels, you got solar paint now, you know, you don't need to do this. Next door, you know. How many we got to? We got 10,000, that's awesome. How many left? You know, 999 million left, bro. I'm tired. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. It's too many people. And we don't have enough time to go door to door trying to address, because this is going slower and this is going faster. And the wider this spread gets, the scarier it gets. And the worst part is compounding. Remember, the projection is the reflection. So the more we're thinking fearful thoughts and experiencing fearful behavior, the more we're projecting out. The media is coming back and like, oh, you want to be afraid? I'll show you afraid. Right? And I can tell you, having been internal, so let's just go to Boston for 1 second. And is there a time limit? Because I'll go all night. So with Boston, everybody looks at like, look at this, CNN's a bunch of idiots, Fox, and I'll put you on the other side of the ledger. That week was the most economically beneficial week. That was better than the Super Bowl. Everybody was scared shitless. And even if they weren't, they were just thrilled to watch the reality show by the million as to whether they were going to get the Chechens, or whoever they were, you know, it's like the thing. So there's no rational resolution to that, right? But as the myth changes, the question is, how do you change the power myths? Just to kind of get to my point. I'm sorry, I think I'll go on that. My ultimate conclusion, and I think I got you there, is that the only way to change a billion people to the new paradigm is to change the power myths. And the question is, how do you change a power myth? All a myth really is a story, right? A story of one person or one group of people is, once that story is retold to one other person, it becomes a myth. When it's told to a lot of people, it becomes a widely held myth. When it becomes a big enough myth, then the harmonic of that power totally affects the moment-to-moment thoughts and decisions of the population. And all of a sudden these cities are popping up everywhere, and it seems that why are these cities popping up everywhere? Mike's not building them. He's out, you know, in the woods with his shorts. Thanks for wearing your shorts, by the way. Appreciate that. We're in an era where the ability to tell stories is at an all-time high. What I'm focusing my time on, and what I would share with you as an option for those of you who are concerned about the fate of the world in the context of this narrative, is to first and foremost make your story a story of solution and love with people that you agree with, bearing in mind that 99% of the people on the earth in every country in the world are fearful, narcissistic, and insane. Trying to convince that population, wherever that population is, to not be that way is like going door to door trying to convince people that the Marines should be building greenhouses. When you find the 1% in your world that vibrate where you either are vibrating or would like to vibrate, spend more time with those people. And that simple act is more profoundly impactful, I think, than anybody will ever really understand, probably at least in our generation, until we get to the other 95% of our consciousness, which is as yet not fully explored. The last thing that I'll say on myths and power, and this is sort of where the soldiers come in. When you think about myths and power, it's always best to meet the audience where they already are. So in other words, it is easier to take an existing myth and meet the audience where they are with that myth, and then take them on a journey with that story or that hero, than it is to invent a new myth that you wish everybody would believe in, but they're just not there. I bring that up for a very specific reason. In this country, for better or for worse, we have mythologized our military and our soldiers and our Marines. For better or worse. Doesn't matter. The opportunity is to meet that mythology where it is. Because as every Democrat loves the soldiers and the military, every Republican loves them, everybody at MSNBC loves them, everybody at Fox loves them, the kids love them, your grandma loves them. Now, they're not going to give them a fucking job. Get crazy. But they love to have them in the parade. You want to come down for the parade? The fact that our Marines and our soldiers have already decided, without even, it's not as an act of, it's not even a self-aware act in the manipulative sense of the media. The fact that they've already decided, even if they're unseen, even if their story is never told and their story never becomes a myth, although I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that it does, but even if the story is never told and it doesn't become a myth, they have already decided to meet the audience where they are. Mike, Rob, Kyle, Will, countless others have already decided to meet the audience where they are with the myth and take them on a journey to this location. They alone will never get us to that location, but they can take that mythology and project it back into our society in a way, because in a way that will naturally manifest that. That is my current bet. That's why I believe that that's a better odds. I believe personally that that's a better use of the brief moments and breaths that I get to share on this earth with you and everybody else than working at the oligopoly back east. And I guess the most useful portion of my ranting and raving, I hope, is the awareness that when you feel victimized, when you feel disempowered by the corruption of the system, remind yourself that your greatest power is what you're thinking, who you're with, what words you're using, and how you're spending your time. That you are them. And that they are the person you see when you look at it in the mirror. And that simple self-awareness and meditation on a daily basis, and the awareness that you yourself are a story, that you yourself are a myth for at least one and probably 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 other people, even if you don't know it. You're a myth for your children, you're a myth for your siblings, you're a myth for your parents. You are a story. And that story is the most powerful thing that you actually have to contribute to this world, because it is as those stories are told that the generations around us will decide they want to be like those stories. And the greatest contribution we can do is actually create stories that are in the arc that we want to go in. What I'll leave you with, the other last thing that I'll say, I'm famous for saying the last thing like 50 times, so this is really my last thing, is despite the technological capacity basically has empowered us to really fuck things up more than ever before and fix them more quickly than ever before. It's a big knife, and it's easy to look at all the horrible things that it's capable of doing, but every time you see the order of magnitude of the horrors of its capacity, understand that that order of magnitude is mirrored directly and identically in the positive manifestation. Just I say, the paralysis of the frustration with what they are doing, or with what the media is doing, or with what the polluters are doing, or what the healthcare system is doing, is a place where I've spent a lot of my. I wrote a book called Greedy Bastards, in a rage, right? And it was not a useful use of my time. It was a useful inventory of the misaligned interests, but it was not a useful use of my time. And my one piece of personal advice, if you find yourself drifting in that direction, is relieve yourself of it and change your thoughts, because A, what you're thinking dictates what happens outside of us, and so it's important that you do that. And B, life is short, and there are a lot. Remember 500 years ago, it was very common for people to be born and die within 3 miles of the same location and never know that anybody lived outside of that radius. And so we have a lot more interaction, we have a lot today to be grateful for, and it is from that posture of gratitude and that harmonic that we then will be in a better position to get more quickly to that location. I hope that this has been a useful use of your time and a coherent presentation on my part. I feel like I'm just having I've had some of these conversations with Mike privately, which is how the speech even happened. Was me ranting and raving at him about the mythology and all this, and he's like, why don't you just come say this to more people? So thank you for being an incredibly patient and attentive audience, not just for me, but I'm incredibly impressed that, by your, you've been sitting here for hours, so I invite you obviously to talk to each other and carry on, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.